Perfect. All right. Welcome everybody to this EA presentation. I'm really excited for this conversation today. I have been deeply inspired by what I want to show you today and explore with you. This is something that I have been thinking about quite a lot in terms of how EA is currently evolving as an art form and how we can take advantage of what I perceive and see the potential in an EA reading to look like. So my goal with us today is to navigate through the chart with a soul and highlight some of the principles that EA will use when it is analyzing the chart. And, and also looking at the chart where we center the human being in the middle, right? So the idea behind an evolutionary astrology reading at its deepest core is to bring somebody into a deeper understanding of the nature of their soul, or if we want to change up the language, we can say, come into a realization of the story that the client or you are living out. And how can we emotionally bring that to the forefront? How can we bring the conversation of what a soul is experiencing, what a human being is experiencing, and let that come through? And so letting EA be a tool that helps us connect to these more profound, wonderful, amazing, sensitive parts of ourselves. So what I would like to put across today is an example of what I think is a possible way that EA can be used to meet these ideas, which again is to try to bridge the gap between the ego self, which is the personality that we use that understands our reality in the most conscious way, and the deeper experiences that seem to emerge into our lives that oftentimes challenge us, other times bring us incredible experiences of meaning that open us up deeper within ourselves, right? We see deeper into reality, we experience emotionally, we connect deeper to reality. And so again, bridging that together is what I see EA to do. And so this is my attempt to show or reflect one of the ways that that can be done. So that is my introduction for us right now. One of the ideas that I would like to implement in a conversation like this is something that I recently learned. I think it was maybe about 3 months ago. I was listening to a conversation between two people, and the interviewer asked this young parent, I think they must have been at least like 33, 34. He asked him, how do you create a connection with your children, and how do you get them to connect to themselves? I was like, wow, that's a really interesting way to understand what it means to be a parent, is that we have all these roles that we need to play out, and all of these responsibilities that we have. And for the most part, a lot of the roles and responsibilities and the expectations that we place on ourselves fill up a tremendous amount of our attention. And so there is very oftentimes little room to cultivate and develop deeper connections with our children's own sense of themselves. Okay, so let me explain further. So he talked about, the interviewer talked about how he homeschools his children. And the dad responded like this. He said him and his wife, every single night, they read a little bit of text to their children. And then instead of them sort of saying, okay, good night, go off, they go, okay, so we've read this text to you. What did you hear? Not what I was telling you the story was about, but what did you hear? Could you share a little bit about how you interpreted or heard this text? What thoughts came up for you, or sensations or feelings came up for you? And then he went on to further explain that the idea behind this is to cultivate selfhood. which again was a very profound thing for me, which again will drive the reason as to why this conversation today with Robin is going to take place, and what deeply influences the way that I see the possibility and the potential of a very powerful and enriching evolutionary astrology reading. And that is that I think for the most part, as a culture, as people, the idea of me or I or myself, for most people, that is something that can be very difficult to connect to. If I asked you, could you tell me what it is that you notice about your needs that are not met in, say, an argument or a conflict or any other situations that could take place? And sometimes we can notice the surface interpretation of what anger does, but we don't know what really deep down inside maybe was the feeling behind the emotion that drove us there, right? The feeling that drove us there, the emotion that drives the feeling. So what this person was talking about was how from an early age you can start to cultivate a child's connection to themselves, which then leads to many things like the ability to recognize one's own sensations that are separate from, say, what somebody else may tell you this sensation is. In the example of reading the book, the child got the opportunity to think about how they were hearing it that is unique to them, which then creates within the brain and within the emotional landscape a connection. And this, I feel, from my perception, and again, I think it's influenced greatly by the work that I do, a lot of us can benefit greatly from self-reflection in a way that is how we are hearing things, how we are interpreting things, what we hear when, say, somebody reads us a text versus what we should, what we're developing an identity structure about what our expectations are. What's the expectation of my response versus coming into an authentic sense of, well, this is what I heard, or this is what I noticed come up for me. So this idea of creating selfhood, I feel, is a powerful. It's not a tool. It's a way of relating to self, especially as Chiron is transiting through Aries. There's a tremendous amount of sort of awareness developing within the collective around their own sense of self and their own ambition, their own stories, their own journeys, and kind of separating themselves from a collective idea of what God is, or what spirituality is, or what does this mean. We're definitely individuating in that way. So this, to me, again, speaks to many different layers of how this idea of selfhood can come into practice, from a parent encouraging their children to develop their own self-identity through own self-reflection and noticing their own sensations and thoughts arrive. And in adults, by allowing themselves to recognize and acknowledge and feel experiences that are real and unique to them. So to me, I think evolutionary astrology, among other tools, this conversation today from an EA point of view, I feel EA offers a great deal of awareness in a very rapid way for selfhood to be created. So that's where I'm going to end off with this over here. And I'm going to step into a conversation with Robin. So Robin, firstly, I'm just going to share the chart on the screen. Let's see if I can do this successfully. Yes. Okay. Wonder if there is a way for me to bring you somewhere where I can see. Okay. No, it's just going to be there. All right. Fantastic. So I'm just going to try and see if I can find an anchoring point in for us today. So part of this process will be an exchange of conversation between myself and you, Robin, and part of it will be me communicating to the audience about the principles of EA, or the methodology of how we would go about looking at the charts, as well as bringing to the forefront concepts that EA uses to understand the chart from this soul perspective or this self perspective. Okay, just want to kind of share that out over here. So I'm going to just start off a little bit with basic ideas of EA. So for people that are new, or this will be good for those of us that are pretty familiar with EA, this will probably be a little bit sort of boring and redundant, but okay. So firstly, evolutionary astrology prioritizes the planet Pluto as a very significant part of an astrology chart. And from EA's languaging, we will use the word the soul, or the soul's desires. Another way that we can relate to or conceptualize the idea of Pluto in a person's astrology chart is where we will have a deep relationship to experiences in our lives that are, on one side, incredibly empowering, where we learn to grow in the deepest way, but it is also a part of us that we carry a tremendous amount of sensitivity. Okay, we're good?
Good.
Fantastic. All right. Okay, so here we have the astrology charts, the natal chart as it's seen. And I just want to quickly recap that we're going to start by looking at the planet Pluto. And we talked about Pluto as the core of the chart. EA highlights this part of the chart as deeply important because this is where the roots of the chart exist, the core desire. Everything that you see around this chart over here is going to be funneled through the nature of the desire that is situated through Pluto. Again, if we remove the language around Pluto and we understand it just as in what it is in reality, we're talking about the way that us as human beings will come into this lifetime, will be born. The very nature of being born itself reflects some form of attachment that will exist within this life. So as we grow into our life, we will consistently have experiences in our lives that will reflect some form of attachment, a drive, an unconscious drive. And for most of us, that unconscious drive is not really understood fully because it's something that's bigger than just what our awareness can hold in this moment. So over our life, we will start to see repeating patterns that will eventually give us a sense of, okay, these seems to be where the challenges, the greatest breakthroughs in our lives will take place. And what do these unconscious attachments or emotional attachments tell us about something deeper that is existing within us? So immediately you can start to see that this conversation around Pluto can open us up to a deeper self-reflection. Part of Pluto's story is also looking at what is called the South Node, or in this case, sorry, let me just press the actual node itself. The South Node. So this is the South Node in the chart. And there is an orientation to looking at the South Node in the chart because we are looking at the nature of time from the past through to the future. I just want to make a quick note over here. When I say the past and the future, I do not mean that the soul moves in a linear form. We are just more speaking to where we will have a history of an identity that we bring with us. So something that is already established or anchored into our perception of the world and our lives. This can be then perceived and seen as the South Node. So think of it more as where we would have conscious security patterns, something that feels familiar to us that we can reflect back on or can reflect deeper into. And what will become more present for us is the story of how we were growing up and such. Okay. The North Node in the chart, again, will reference, and the way I'm going to describe it is like this. The North Node in the chart references a development within our consciousness that if we integrated more of those experiences, it would cultivate and grow our South Node, and not in a way of like a plant. I think more in the sense that we move slowly beyond those familiarities, those security patterns of the past, and we move more towards experiences that challenge our growth edge, where we're ready to recognize that this is what's comfortable. And then just on the other side over here is an experience that pulls us out of our comfort zone. But once we experience getting used to that comfort zone or that uncomfortability, we've grown more. And this is where wisdom can be cultivated. So the soul, in a sense, has this beautiful sort of mechanic where there's an energy that drives us forward or drives us to something. And then there is what we would say a boat that we are in that we can recognize. So Pluto is the undercurrent, and then the boat is on top, and it moves us along, and we can kind of see the landscape with our eyes, and we can notice the experiences with our emotions and sense them. So of course the nodes are more salient, they are more present with us than Pluto. But over a long period of time of deep inner reflection, we can start to understand the deeper drives that Pluto brings to us. Okay, so one last note. There are exceptions to the rules when it comes to evolutionary astrology and looking at charts. This is a chart where there are exceptions. There is a quote-unquote skipped step in this astrology chart where you have Pluto, the Sun, and Jupiter. And you bring a very full house of all possible skip steps, exceptions that can exist. For one, if we're going to look at the charts and just recognize the Sun as a skip step, we're going to say, actually, EA does not see the Sun as a skip step in terms of previous experiences or past lives. It's saying this is an area that must be integrated into this lifetime. Because from the point of view of the Sun, this is something that is incarnated this lifetime. You don't bring your Sun in from the previous life, as it were. So the Sun already in this chart over here says, hey, here's my first lesson in advanced EA interpretation. I'm hoping that I can try to bring some of that to the forefront with you today. But for those that are watching, here we have a skip step where not only do we have a planet that is not seen the same way as, say, Jupiter. When a skip step exists in EA, there is what is called a resolution node. And I'm going to get too technical over here. Just bear with me for a minute. I hope I don't lose many people. But when you have what is called a resolution node, you are basically asking the question, well, how do I resolve this skip step? How can I look at the chart and try to think about what may be the resolution, right? To resolve something, to try to make sense of it in a different way. And so there is a specific way you stand. If you were standing on the planet, you would look down to the middle, and then you would take your left hand or left arm and move it out like this. And then whatever the node is on your left arm, that is then what is called the resolution node. So the methodology is like so. Here you have the nodes. Here you have a planet that is squaring the node. In this case, it's Jupiter. So my question is, how do I resolve this? How do you resolve the Jupiter square? How do you start to look at it? Well, you're going to have to stand on Jupiter, look straight at the middle, and then raise your left hand, which is pointing this way. I'm going to actually take an annotation. Yeah. Like so. And we see that Jupiter needs to be resolved through the south node. Okay. You also have to take into consideration that Mercury, which is not on this chart at the moment, needs to be looked at as an extra layer to understand the resolution over here. This is getting very technical, very, very fast. I don't want to lose many of us, but this is a chart that is not just straightforward in the sense that, hey, here's Pluto, here's its nodes, this is what the evolution is. There is some stuff that Robin is here to try to figure out in this lifetime. Okay. So we're gonna just start slowly over here, and I'm very curious to see how this goes. This is an 8th house Pluto soul. So first thing I'd like to say, Robin, is thank you for giving me the opportunity to sit with you in this way and explore a part of yourself that should be and is deeply sacred. This is your emotional journey. This is something that you have lived throughout your life. And it's something that you have in many times and many points in your journey probably asked the question, why is this happening? Rejoiced at many experiences, felt saddened and grief at other times. So I just want to acknowledge that. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you for giving the opportunity to come into this space with you and to explore your chart in a way like this. Okay, so here we have an 8th house Pluto soul, and I'd like to ask you my first question. When you see Pluto in the 8th house, it suggests that the experience of intense emotional fear of, is everything going to be taken away from me at any point? It's present throughout your life. How have you come into contact with that? How have you worked with that growing recognition that you're very, very psychically aware that things can change at any moment? Things and not necessarily, I would say change. Sometimes in extreme cases, the feeling of death, like loss. I don't want to lose that. How have you come into that experience throughout your life? Would you mind sharing a little bit about something that comes up for you as a way to connect to that space?
Well, I have to say astrology has certainly helped.
Okay.
Deep self inner exploration and just exploration of um, the functions of the universe and trying to connect with that Sagittarian North Node and of inner faith. But fear. I have certainly experienced intense fear of loss in every way in my life, whether it's grounded in reality or not. And
Okay.
so I try to just be objective about it and see it for what it is.
So you talked about faith as a North Node Sagittarius experience. How has faith guided you to deal with and cope with experiences of, wow, I'm at an edge of something where the uncertainty of something in front of me is not really there? How has that helped you come into a feeling of self-assurance or self-security?
Um, I don't know how much security it really gives, but it gives more of a sense of acceptance
Okay.
or just understanding that life is constant change
Hmm.
and learning to let go of what I cannot control and realizing that everyone has to go through all of these things at some time.
Okay.
And, and it's part of the journey.
Part of the journey. Have you noticed throughout your life how you would have attracted people into your life that saw that psychic side of you, that knew life in a more intense way? I'm sure that must be something that's true for you, that as you were growing up, there was a very clear sense of what is dangerous, what is not, what can be trusted, what can be not. And even go further than that and say, at what point did you realize that trust was a fundamental principle for you? Because of Pluto 8th house soul, it's really learning to experience what is vulnerable and what is not for them. And so when we form trust, that is really us learning about, this is me opening up and saying, I'm showing you a little bit more than what I would show somebody else because I feel safer. Or, yeah.
I have throughout my life thrown myself into um, very vulnerable situations.
Okay.
Um, and, but, I thankfully have always come through them okay. But I mean, like, I've thrown myself into situations like leaving home at a very early age and just going off uh, with nothing but a friend and seeing what was to come. And I've noticed I've moved around quite a bit. And so, when you move around, you do kind of like leave everything behind and start over. I have
Sure.
done that a few times.
Okay.
But yeah, people have always, also having Neptune, I guess, near my midheaven, people do see that sensitivity in me, the psychic sensitivity, or
So there's something really fascinating you shared that I felt had so much psychic depth, as in your psyche carries this experience. Is you talked about leaving home very early, and I can imagine that leaving home very early must have been deeply empowering to you in one way because it activated that north node in your chart.
mm-hmm.
I suspect that a part of you wanted to explore freedom in a
Yes,
way that was different than, say, what maybe the rules were at home and what the expectations were at home, right?
yes, very much.
Do you and so leaving home must have been a big deal because for a Pluto eighth house soul, leaving home does not mean I'm going to I'm exploring something new, right? That's a big part of what that's personal for you. But I can imagine that for at a deeper part of you, this was also about really understanding the nature of attachment. I mean, your parents at the time had to go through some form of realization that this was a loss. Even I'm not sure entirely what your home life was like at the time. I suspect, if you feel comfortable sharing a little bit about what that process is like, you can absolutely do that. But my sense of it is that there's a very strong Plutonian eighth house experience of the choice or the desire to free yourself also meant bringing emotional dynamics into play between yourself and your caregivers, your parents, who probably at the time felt some form of responsibility towards your welfare and health.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm sure it devastated them. So, yeah.
without saying too much that you need to share, but just kind of maybe nodding to it, is how did you, at a later point in your life, reconcile that within yourself and with your parents?
Well, I went back and as I matured a little bit and established a good relationship, and um, you know, I, 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 you know, when I did the things that like that, I mean, I was very young and I was just acting out of needs in the moment and ignorance of youth. So, um,
I mean, what I like, or what I feel is important to bring into contact over here is, if you notice on the chart, there is Aries on that fourth house cusp.
mhm.
So for me, I sense that something that's very vital for you is to actually take up space in a way that is different from maybe how you were growing up in home. This was important for you to take up space. And it seems to me that one of the ways that taking up space meant to you at this age was deciding to say, hey, I'm going out into the world to establish something that's my own. Does that land in a way that's true for you if you reflect back on your life? Would you say that can be?
Yeah, there's truth to that. And also I attribute it a little bit to that the Gemini, the nodes, because I was running away from being in the sixth house. I was running away from established routine as
Uh-huh.
part of it. I had a really hard time with, you know, I wanted to get away from established routine and experience things differently.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, having a North Node in Sagittarius, part of your development in this lifetime is to figure out what your faith actually brings you. And sometimes in a situation where you need to, when you want to go away from routines and explore the world in a different way, you do need to have a little bit of faith that, you know, you're going to have money in your pocket to be able to survive. Which I'm sure you can recall many moments where you thought to yourself, I wonder how this decision is working out for me in some way.
Yeah. It's true.
What I'd love to do is take a moment to kind of venture into some of the wisdom that you gained from that adventure that you went on. It's very clear to me that this is a soul that is seeking adventure, but the thing that's the part of the chart that fascinates me a lot, of course, is these planets that are sitting over here and are squaring the nodes in the chart. So you're definitely looking to work through something. So yeah, you have this Aries fourth house cusp energy. We can see that there's a repeating theme of the moon that's very close to the south node here. In fact, they would have crossed each other just before you were born, giving me a sense that the moon plays a very important role in, you know, this identity that you bring to the world. And the moon and the fourth house are deeply related, of course, from an EA perspective. You've even got Venus in Cancer over there. So just kind of bouncing around a little bit, you can see the moon influences that Venus. So relationships, something to do with emotional depth and growth through crisis, and a very strong instinctual desire to go and figure out who you are. That's what I kind of get a sense of when I look at these symbols here.
Right.
So that naturally leads me to seeing more about what this is here at the top. So that's kind of handing this back to you and saying, in this adventure, in those adventure, what type of wisdom did you gain from the experience that if you recalled back to that moment, how would you tell a younger version of yourself? What would you say to a younger version of yourself? I know that's an interesting question in some way.
Yeah. I mean, you're right about, that is pretty much what I was doing in my younger years, in my teenage years was, which I guess a lot of people do, but was, trying to find out who I was and find my identity and confirm my identity. Because, like I always felt like I was different. I always knew I was different for a lot of reasons. And so when I did leave home and move out west, that is when I got into astrology. And so that did that, along with everything that I experienced, I guess, helped to confirm the things that I wanted to confirm about myself.
Fair enough. Would you say that astrology in some way was a way for you to project yourself into it and then see yourself through it?
Yeah.
Could you see yourself through astrology in a way that opened you up to broader horizons of self-understanding?
Yeah, very much. That's what astrology should do.
I can imagine that would be a very potent truth for you, because one of the things you said right in the beginning of this dialogue around Pluto in the 8th house and separation, early separation, was, I needed to kind of step outside of the routines. Okay, so my sense of it is that your identity really needed something more broader to see itself exist within, to then come to this understanding, this deep understanding within yourself that freedom is very important for you.
Right. I suppose also, if when I was young, I had more self-confidence, maybe I wouldn't have had those needs. But I guess that's just part of what was all part of the whole thing.
Yeah, I can imagine that the North Node in Sagittarius is alive right now in this conversation, because to find yourself in some way through astrology as you create this Plutonian separation, if we kind of just pause for a moment and we think about the original point of this conversation in terms of EA and its principles, we talked about Pluto as a core energy that drives the nature of our life experiences, right? So for you, something really profound happened in your life through some form of separation, some form of, this is where the relationship dynamics end in the current context of my life. And through that separation, I will experience attachment to new things, to new experiences. And a big part of that process is that Pluto 8th house, which is the drive to empower yourself. So Pluto empowers ourselves through osmosis, right? To merge with something. So merging with astrology seemed to be a very strong, prominent North Node personality.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I want to just go back to something you mentioned. I wrote the word confirm. I feel I can't remember the exact sentence structure, but you said about confirm your identity and also your uniqueness, something different. You know, you're somebody that really advocates for something different or unique within your side of yourself. What is the reason for you seeing those two qualities as important for you? What have they brought you throughout your life? What is individuality or that brought you to life?
More acceptance and confidence in myself for being who I am.
Okay.
Allowing myself to be who I am. I mean, not that I, ultimately, established that, like in completion. It's a work in progress, but that's, the direction of, what steered me in that direction.
So what makes your individuality very important to you?
Well, I guess just like for all of us that don't feel like we fit into the consensus reality, just learning to feel okay with it and to see the value in it and recognize the gifts.
Okay. What else? How is individuality important to you? Or what makes it important for you?
Um, I don't know. I guess just feeling okay with it,
Feeling okay with it?
and recognizing what it has to offer.
Recognizing what it has to offer. Have you, throughout your life, shown people what it offers? Can you think of a time or a moment where you've come across a situation or a scenario where that wisdom that you hold or that connection to something that feels so important to you, do you remember a time where you've given that to somebody else or held that space? Do you hold that space today?
Yeah, I don't know. I see it as like, I guess also being a Virgo, I feel like I like to be a problem solver.
Oh,
I like
okay,
to
okay.
find it. I can't think of my word. I lost my word. Uh, Shoot, different ways of finding solutions
Yes.
to doing things, coming up with ideas.
Okay. Have you found success in that in many ways? Like just in terms of broad scope, notice with um
Innovative, right?
yeah, children. Okay, that's good. That's good. Thank you for that, by the way. I really appreciate how you allowed me to come into a deeper questioning of what lies beneath our attachment, eighth house, to individuality, you can see that it's actually a very important thing in your chart, not only because you have Chiron in Aquarius, but there's also the Sun conjunct Pluto.
Right.
It feels to me in this chart that cultivating a deeper sense of the reason for individuality and your attachment to it will bring you bring you closer to why that Sun Pluto contact is there, and also what that Chiron in Aquarius may resemble.
Yeah, I really like to share ideas more than other people do, more than a lot of people do. I see so much value in it, and I'm always noticing when people don't share their ideas, and like, wow, they could have shared those ideas and helped other people, but yet they don't. And it's something that I'm always aware of.
I guess that what's very powerful about your reflection with me right now is the Mercury in the ninth house Libra. This sharing of ideas, right? There's this Mercury that flourishes nicely and beautifully in the ninth house Libra over there to distribute, to allow us to think more broadly, maybe. And then there's also the Venus in Cancer in the seventh. There's a part of you that is naturally sensitive to the possibility or the impact of how ideas can be shared. And you can see the South Node in Gemini, ruled by Mercury in the ninth house Libra. And the moon's very close to that South Node there. It's also ruled by Mercury. And the moon is also, well, the Mercury is ruling the moon, and the moon is ruled by Venus, is being ruled by the moon. So there's a repeating theme I just want to bring out to our attention over here. And has my mouse stopped working? No, it hasn't. It's just disappeared. So if I sort of erase this over here, just draw attention, clear all drawings. There we go. Look at this. So Mercury influences the South Node as the South Node ruler, and the moon sits very close there. As I said, I love to give power to the moon in this context because of its relationship to the nodes. It carries very significant importance, and the planet Venus is being influenced by the moon. So we've got this very interesting little bouncing back and forth here. So I can really start to build a sense of karmic dynamics that in the past you may have been very vocal about your ideas and sharings and opinions. My sense leads me to the fact that the early exit from the home environment was because these ideas maybe weren't emotionally received in the way that you wanted them to be, or there wasn't a conversation or dialogue that felt as if you could go beyond the general boundaries of the rules. Am I in a direction that seems to be going somewhere, or is that off?
Well, yeah, I think there's truth to that, but I think a lot of it lied in the fact that I probably did not know how to articulate at that time
Okay.
how I was feeling. That Mars and Pisces retrograde in the third house may have had something to do with that. But yeah, I don't know if I was able to articulate my needs or my feelings adequately.
I have a sense that the Chiron in the second house Taurus or second house Aquarius in this context over here speaks to a part of you where those needs may have not had labeling so that you could communicate to your environment that this was something that was important to you. That's what you're saying to me in another way, right? That part of you had not maybe experienced the power, Pluto, eighth house, or the powerlessness in this situation to be seen.
Right.
Do you feel like you were seen as a child growing up?
No, I don't. Or I didn't.
How is that? How have you worked through that process throughout your life? How have you given yourself or came into integration or wholeness around the idea of feeling seen, especially when you're trying to articulate your ideas or feelings?
I don't know. Because I don't know that I feel it's so much of an issue anymore as an
Okay.
adult, or at least not consciously.
I mean, that's great. That you're. Do you feel empowered now? That's let's. I mean, I'm sure you you can recall to. Are you currently in a relationship right now?
Yes, I'm
Okay.
married.
Okay. And do you feel that just so I can kind of formulate this over here, a big part of the karmic dynamic in the chart appears to be there seems to be a very strong importance around how your ideas are received in a relationship.
Yeah, I don't think they're necessarily received well as I would like them to be.
How do you reconcile that within yourself out of sheer curiosity?
Mm, well, it's frustrating, but I guess I just am aware of the fact that it is what it is. I don't know. Um, and I just accept it. Um, keep trying. I don't know.
You're trying. It sounds like you've got a few ways that you might deal with that. What's frustrating about it, by the way? What would be frustrating to you about it?
Well, we all want to be understood. We all want to be we all we all want to be understood the way we're intending. Our intentions. We want other people to see our intentions the way we do, but that's just not the way it always is.
Gotcha.
Um, and I, I try to look at things objectively. Um, Especially since my husband has Venus exactly opposite mine
Oh,
in the second house in Capricorn within a degree. And our suns are exactly opposite to the degree.
that must be really interesting to experience. Tell me more about how you've come into contact with that process. What do you give each other in terms of the polarities of your Venuses?
Trying to accept each other's different values in the Venus areas, like what we enjoy.
Sure. I get a sense that with Venus in Capricorn, there is a strong need to make sure that emotions are kept nicely organized and tight in a little box, right? Whereas
Right.
my sense,
South nodes in Capricorn too.
okay. So out of sheer curiosity, you mentioned earlier about moving home again because routine. One of my questions at that point I was going to ask is how have you come into the polarity or not even, yeah, how have you come into the realization that routines are beneficial to you?
Well, because without any routines, you don't get much done and you're scattered. So I'm trying to embrace that Saturn conjunct my North Node and learn, you know, to establish routines where they're needed, where I
Uh-huh.
haven't in the past.
Gotcha.
That's just been something I've had to learn throughout my life.
Do you find that you struggle with routines because the the they're like squares and Excel spreadsheet kind of forms, but your Sag part of
Yeah.
you wants to go like, can't we just go hiking where the trail is like this?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm 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 fascinated by how you and your partner find the space, or give each other space for the wisdom that each of you bring to each other. Because it would appear to me, at least, that with somebody with Saturn in Capricorn and Venus in Capricorn, that the idea of order feels very secure, whereas the idea of a windy Piscean abstract path feels the sort of nemesis.
Right. Well, he does have his sun, Jupiter, Moon, and Chiron in Pisces.
Okay.
So,
So
and
do you,
Sag rising. We both have
that's
Sag rising.
rising.
Yeah.
So how do you reconcile that process? How do you work together in a way where you go, hey, this is what I think is beneficial in this moment. He's like, yeah, that's a great idea. And then the other way around, because he must in some way provide you with an orientation towards seeing routines as beneficial in some way, right? If we can create order, then there's clarity of some sense.
Yeah, I suppose that's one of the things I'm learning from him is better establishment of routines.
Is that true though? That his Capricorn, Venus, and South Node there comes in with this with a very strong sort of I need to take responsibility for things. I
Yes.
was just, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I suppose that's one way that I'm benefited. You know, and when it comes to some things like politics, we just don't talk about it.
Oh no,
Avoid
I
the
can.
discussion.
I feel like that's a powerful space in your psyche for both of you, and I'm wondering how Jupiter, Sun, Pluto plays out in the story. I suspect that you have political views that are in some way opposite to each other or different in different ways?
Um, just in some areas, yeah, he's more conservative and I'm more liberal.
Okay.
So, yeah, I have a really strong um, sense of social justice. I'm so bothered by social injustice.
Tell me more.
I've just been noticing that I don't seem to have a problem with holding on to anger in my life in personal issues. But when it comes to social injustice, I have a real problem with it.
Do you see how does social justice bring emotional affect out of you? So if you see, say, something externally as, disturbing, how tell me more about how that relationship works. Or maybe we can go then and explore that in the sense of how does that external situation mirror an internal response within yourself? Because that I'm very curious about that, or I'm intrigued to go to wonder a bit about how these two parts of you, one that is external stimuli, and then how that brings up something that's important for you, obviously. Have you thought about that?
I don't know. I guess it bothers me to see people hurting other people and causing other people to suffer.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with you there.
And so I don't like holding on to anger, but that's the one place in my life where I have trouble letting go of the anger.
Okay. Is there a moment or a place at an earlier part of your life where you can maybe notice yourself getting angry at things that appeared unjust, like from an injustice perspective?
Yeah, I think the things that have made me most angry in my life were things that I felt were unjust, even if they were like to me in a way that I felt that I was being treated. When I'm thinking back to when I was young.
Do you remember a time where you felt that something was not fair to you?
Sure. Um, yeah, little memories.
How do you think they impacted you?
I don't know, I suppose make you feel less valued.
Less valued?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. What's interesting about today's world is that there is a very strong emphasis, especially around the Pluto and Capricorn children, of emotional validation for experiences. There seems to be a paradigm shift in our ability with Pluto through Capricorn to say to a 3-year-old that's hurt itself or a 6-year-old that hurt itself that that must have been painful. I acknowledge that that is something that's real for you, and it's okay to cry. I know that that's probably painful. Um, I'm here to help you. I can get a plaster for you. Versus, say, in the past, where we weren't really that good at being able to process our emotions. And so, therefore, we would say, you know, yes, things happen and you should get over it, kind of thing.
Hmm.
This level of insensitivity that we've, with Pluto and Capricorn, I think we've opened ourselves up to processing the fact that we actually are emotional beings that are realizing the importance of emotional verification, emotional validation. Like, okay, this experience was intense for me. So you'll see movements like trauma informed work, or people experiencing more, recognizing what is healthy for them, what is not. There are many different ways that this comes out currently, but that's something that seems to be very strong in the collective at the moment.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that in relation to Pluto and Capricorn. That's interesting.
So I was wanting to kind of go to a place where it's interesting to me that for somebody like yourself who has Venus and Cancer in the seventh, that also talks about not necessarily having the Virgo, sixth house moon, sixth house south node, Jupiter, Sun in Virgo, the the availability for a skill set to be given to you so that you could actually allow what was important for you at an earlier part of your life to actually be expressed. And I'm very intrigued by how the outer world houses things that are very important to you, and they almost are the voice for what's really inside of you. And I suspect that in a relationship with you, that what's very important for you is if there is something that seems to be off balance, that part of your Sun, Jupiter, Mercury skip step with Pluto there is to come into the grief and the realization that this experience has happened, and that it might have not been fair. There is a lot of suffering in the world, but to acknowledge it.
So you think that it was like a personal experience that was really intense in the past that hasn't been processed?
I definitely am leaning towards looking at your chart from this perspective, yes. And the reason why I'll say this to kind of back it up is it's not, you have both Mercury and Neptune in Libra. So of course there's going to be a part of you that's naturally looking outside of yourself to the other. Okay. And I think that with Neptune in the 10th house, through my experience of working with people with Neptune in the 10th house, Neptune in the 10th house souls are very sensitive to where there is authoritative repression or behaviorisms in society that where those boundaries are crossed for the safety. Right. That's what Capricorn really represents, is the recognition that if I draw a line over here, inside of the line, we can say play creatively because we know that the edge of something is marked. We don't cross that. Right. And sometimes those boundaries through time can at some point serve our safety, but at other points they can start to become repressive when they become older, right? The definitions in our culture, or the definitions in the way that we all structure things, once they become aged, they actually naturally draw in Aquarius themes of, okay, we need to transform this, right? So I
Right.
can see why it's very important for you to see to look at the world and say, hey, where are we not being true to ourselves? Where do we carry behaviorisms and expectations in society that may not necessarily be recognizing the emotional reality of the other person?
Mm-hmm.
And if I click over here and I look at the Venus square the Neptune there, I can begin to get a sense that with Neptune being completely open, there is no protection here. Wherever we have Neptune in our chart, this is where there is no protection. Nobody's coming to save us here with Neptune. So we feel incredibly open and vulnerable in a way that's different to Scorpio. Scorpio, at least we can kind of like create an armoring, whereas Neptune's like, nah, I'm at sea. So the world, to me, I think in the outside world can be a very scary place for you if you go out there feeling that deep sensitivity of that Neptune. Right. It's also an adventure for you as a younger person. You mentioned that. You said, as a younger person, I went out and I was a lot more sort of free in that way, maybe because you're going to find yourself, which is beautiful. I suspect that with the Venus squaring that Neptune in the 7th, the world has become, you've started to notice how the world also carries a tremendous amount of distortion. And that sensitivity can bring out a part of you that says, hey, I want to call out that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But part of that square in my eyes, along with the Virgo stuff, is there are people, this is where I think the individuality part of the story comes in. There are circumstances, situations, people who do not see it that way or do not have that sensitivity. And they can be threatening. They can act in ways where there is no control. So again, I feel the Jupiter, the Pluto, the Sun, part of it is within yourself. You're learning how to come to terms with the fact that the world has got many beautiful things in it, but it also has many things that are very dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's been on my mind lately.
Absolutely. It's definitely something that is true. We as a civilization on planet Earth are definitely going through something at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. Dangerous times.
Yes. So I wanted to just explore one little thing before we can maybe close up today. And that was the 6th house energy, Virgo energy in your chart, and how, and maybe even the Chiron in the 2nd. How good are you at the moment in your life at giving yourself permission to be unapologetically Robin? And so
it's a work in progress.
Work in progress?
I would say.
Do you find yourself having to work through patterns, whether they were projected onto you, whether you've internalized them, or you're naturally sensitive to feelings of persecution? And this is not good enough. I can't be good enough here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Would you say part of that Pluto in the 8th house squaring the nodes would also show that that's part of that was an unresolved history?
Yes, absolutely. I definitely think that the soul carries a sensitivity here around being seen for who you naturally are. And that sensitivity causes a tremendous amount of crisis within yourself of, well, I run the risk of showing who I am. When I run that risk, I'm aware that I can feel humiliated. I can feel ashamed. And I can hide that part of me. And I sense the Chiron and the Aquarius in the 2nd house is the sensitivity of saying, in some places, I can tell people exactly who I am, and in other places, I hide because that individuality can be hurt or threatened or made fun of in some way.
Or misunderstood.
Or misunderstood. That's right. Yeah. Very normal Sagittarius Gemini axis.
Yeah, definitely.
So as you kind of develop your nodes in this chart over here, do you find, do you, how do you come into balancing your nodes in your chart? How have you worked consciously with them using EA as a tool or other life experiences? How have you found that multiplicity of the South Node in Gemini where, you know, your partner can say this and you can say that and you can find common ground, but in other ways you cannot?
I don't know. That's something that I'm trying to understand. I see so much of the Gemini South Node in ways that I'm working on expressing it in healthier, more constructive ways. I'm not so sure I understand the North Node, where
Okay.
the North Node is playing.
It's very interesting to me to look at the chart from just a purely EA methodology perspective, in the sense that if you look at Jupiter squaring the nodes, I mean, Jupiter's sitting at 10 and the nodes are sitting at 3. So from the point of view of EA, this exact square has already taken place, right?
Right.
So this whole, you know, the Jupiter is in, from aspects and phases point of view, Jupiter's in a new phase to the sun. So again, we can kind of start to notice or associate that this Jupiter is in a resolution pattern already, right? You've already gained the insights of that stressful life where Jupiter and the sun we're bringing it there. I think it's bringing your truth to the table. Feels to me at the surface that what this is about, right? The sun is actually asking you to take up space here around what it is that you believe. And the Jupiter that rules your North Node is part of a square. So there's a kind of weird little dynamic here where the very nature of the North Node itself is part of a planet that feels absent consistently within your consciousness. So I can kind of get a sense of why you would say that the North Node would be almost elusive to you, because on one part, the very nature of this North Node and this Jupiter that rules your North Node is temporarily unavailable, or it wasn't mirrored back to you growing up in a way that is natural to you. And I think Jupiter square the nodes can be challenging if we're not sort of like trying to really understand its nature. I think from my experience of understanding squares to nodes with my own is that we never fully come into, this is what it is throughout our life. It's something that just continues to keep developing, and we form closer emotional relationships to what feels like the Jupiter resolution point. But it also houses a lot of wisdom. And that's why right in the beginning of the conversation, I asked you, what type of wisdom do you feel that you have about life when you've gone on your adventures? The Jupiter piece speaks to the adventures, and the wisdom speaks to the Virgo process. You must have been abducted somewhere in your life around where your ideas and other people's ideas butt heads.
Yeah, quite often.
Okay. That to me, if I were to kind of tie something in together, I would say that recognition, we could explore it further to gain deeper clarity for those that are watching. But how do you find acceptance in relationship with people where their ideas challenge your own and the other way around? Where is that line of individuality that says, okay, this is mine, this is yours? And how do you not maybe sort of shy away from your belief taking up space, and at the same time giving lots and lots of space for everybody else's beliefs to take place? Like, okay, you guys believe that, that's cool. Tell me what you believe. This is fantastic. I'm going to build a church for you to tell me your ideas and beliefs. But I'm never going to draw attention to me because, you know, that exposure is too much, right? I can't get into a conversation and have a debate with somebody about my beliefs and feel very Sagittarius about it. Like, this is how I stand. This is my opinions. Can you do that consistently?
I do tend to be pretty vocal about my beliefs and feelings.
Okay.
Um,
And when
but
challenged about them,
what?
when challenged about them,
Um, yeah, I don't even have to be challenged, really. I mean, in my personal life, I'm pretty strong about how I see things and my feelings, beliefs, and values. Um, they're often met with opposition,
okay.
which I have to just accept. You know, you're where you're at, I'm where I'm at. But um, I do tend to be pretty strong in my beliefs.
Okay. So out of curiosity, when you explore those beliefs, especially the interplay between self and other, when you hold those beliefs out there, they naturally bring in to your field somebody else that will maybe overpower those beliefs or tell you you're wrong or bring into stronger debates. How does that work?
What do you mean?
Well, I'm curious to see how the Jupiter part of you and the North Node part of you shows up, right? So part of what you've shown me is that the Jupiter Sagittarius piece will show up and say, "Hey, this is my core truth. Like this is I'm vocal. I'm telling you what I'm thinking." But that's also going to attract a lot of people that will have the same kind of views, not the same views, but the same maybe a commitment to their ideas as you. It seems like that would naturally. Do you attract people in that will have that, or do you attract people in and will say, okay, cool. Yeah, you think what you think, but that never actually brings in that more confrontation of that eighth house of, well, could you tell me a little bit more about why you think that way? Um, to the person who's challenging you and the other way around, so that the idea of the conversation itself expands further than what your position is and their position, but what's actually the truth as a Piscean thing, which is what are your biases that you bring to the table? How are your possessions second house, Karen, but what are your positions tell you about where your shadows are, and also what's great and wisdom and what holds wisdom. There's an entire dimension of the way that we construct our reality that is built in that way. And I think sometimes with our Sagittarius way of looking at things, we can maybe just highlight our beliefs, but not the totality of what it means to hold a belief, which is to cast a shadow on something that we may not see, which is what Gemini says. It's all good that you have your truth, but where are you not seeing something? Because you can only see a certain amount of truth. I hope that's not too a lot. I figured that I felt like I maybe just kind of spoke quite a lot there for a moment, but
Um, I'm not sure I understand, but I would think maybe just trying to be objective
Mhm.
and see things from outside of myself.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that it's definitely a balancing skill that's in this chart, 100%. I want to make it very clear that what I'm sharing here is when we construct our worldview, there are parts of our worldview that will contain limitations. And so, with a type of setup that you have, I'm curious how, when you do cast your truth into the world, it attracts a sort of confrontation to expose any form of underlying weaknesses or limitations in those truths, as
Mm,
well as also how your truth can be empowering to other people. So it's kind of like a binary, it works
right.
both ways. And how does that conversation take place? How do you come into deep exploration of conversation with people where our biases are or the pieces that they will say, no, this is how I believe something and I'm not budging. Why do you believe that? Tell me more, kind of thing, right? That's what I mean. As in, how does your do you notice how your Gemini moon may ask you sometimes to just be very curious about the nature of the other person's belief without trying to say anything about your own?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Because to me, I feel that that is one of the ways that the resolution in this chart looks like.
Okay. So
Because there's
that's
so much.
why I would attract the conflicts that occur, just to help me to grow in that.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, from my point of view, because I would say that there's a lot of Libras in the chart. So my sense of it is that the way that that Libra works out is either you control the relationship perspective by saying this is the truth. And part of that lesson is giving yourself permission to be individuated, but not allowing the other individuality to come in and threaten what feels secure as a truth. But then the polarity exists as well, where you may or not, where you may actually kind of swing to the other side and say, not take up space, be like, nope, this is where I have no reason to interject in some way, even though I know that what I want to bring to this conversation could help further deepen self-reflection around why we believe the things we believe. And so to come into balance between those two places of give and take.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So part of the North Node would suggest a strong association with people who are ready to go into that Sagittarius conversation with you, which means exploration of truth beyond our beyond like what's the surface. Like, why would you? What is it about this political view that inspires you? What is it about this political view that gives you power? How do you see this working out in a way that supports the community? And then kind of invite that type of reflection back for you as it deepens your own relationship to the things that you stand for and believe. So there's so much sort of magic and beauty that comes from an exchange of dialogue between two people, where what you bring to it is the sensitivity to listen genuinely, but then also the power to be courageous in holding the position that you have and exploring why you hold that position as well. Do you see how that kind of multiplicity, or like how that field can be very dynamic and very powerful for you? I get a sense that you're learning how to give value to your voice in one way, but you're also learning to show other people how important it is to have a voice for themselves, which is why I think you lean more towards a liberal kind of perspective too, in that sense.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. It makes sense. So then I can see where I'm growing with that skip step.
Absolutely.
So maybe in a past life I didn't. I was just maybe too stuck in my view
I
and
think,
was persecuted for it.
yes, yes. I definitely think that with the amount of Virgo that's in your chart, that you've experienced lifetimes where circumstances or situations where you've been innocent, but life has not treated you in that way. So you've lost that innocence. You've come into people that have been highly authoritative in their way and just said, this is how it is. And so, right. But you've also been part of the story where this is a right that you can't not advocate for. And that's brought in the polarity of people who may be even more powerful than yourself and said, well, this is where you need to keep quiet. That's where I see that Chiron in the second house in Aquarius, right? As an act of self-preservation, you would have needed to hide your individuality. So there's a wound about, the sensitivity of, as you said in the beginning, freedom to move around, to have that independence, right? To feel different, to individuality. These are very important principles that I think speak to a deep part of you. And my sense of it is that part of that experience comes because if that gets threatened in some way, because a belief system may imply that you cannot have that freedom to move, it's very devastating for you. And I think your early life environment reflected that in a subtle way.
Yeah, I'd have to think about in what ways it did, but there's must be some truth in that. It's something I'll think about. I think
Well,
definitely prior lives. And I have to
yes.
think about how that manifested in my early life and this life.
I mean, it doesn't necessarily, well, at least from my point of view, it doesn't necessarily have to be word for word. It can be
Right.
more something of your orientation towards an environment that felt
Right.
that you needed to liberate from, as an example.
Yeah, my
You can follow the
experience of it.
rules. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a powerful moment of reflection, is how do the rules of engagement influence the way that you show up? Whether it be through the rules of the society that it houses, whether it be the rules through how the local authorities have decided that this is what's okay and what's not, to what social media will decide is healthy or not, to what may be the rules in
Relationships,
the
right.
house. Yeah, exactly.
Um, yeah, I mean, I was definitely, when I was 15, I was in a relationship with someone who was very controlling in an
Okay.
abusive way. So,
Okay. That was a very powerful piece of sharing, by the way, because you gave insight into something that's very real about what we've been talking about. That's what I mean, is that, to attract somebody that Pluto eighth house, right, is a possession, and then to be controlling, what they're showing you is that in order to be controlling, they probably feel very insecure about
right.
something, right? So what does it feel, what the experience of powerlessness, and how and what you needed to do to overcome that, like to come out of that situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, yeah, that's how my first relationship was experienced, as, and at a very young age, just 15. I was in that relationship for like 2 years.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good relationship to reflect on through this lens of what types of beliefs you may have felt you needed to hear. And at some point you may have come into Mars in the third house Pisces, a sense of disillusionment about the ideal versus what was really being shared or said within yourself, what you wanted it to be versus what it became. And then eventually the realization that this is where that Pluto eighth house needs to make a cut.
Yeah. And learning to establish boundaries.
Oh, yes. Very important for you for having Venus in the seventh house Cancer, which I suspect when it comes to your relationship with your partner, you've definitely learned where those boundaries are and how they work and how to communicate them, right?
Hmm. Yeah. You know, it took maturing throughout my life, but yeah.
Well, I feel that, well, my sense of it is that the time has come past. So I just want to say thank you deeply for spending time with me in this process and doing something that I often find with EA, and that is that the nature of the interaction itself is sometimes seen in the chart. What I mean by that is that I came to you today and we talked about your astrology chart, and a big part of what I was bringing to this type of conversation was one of the ways that astrology and EA, or at least EA, can be had with another person, right? So these are my ideas. And so you held space in some way for those ideas to flourish through this time, and for people to see that. And I mean, that was something that you said earlier part of this conversation, was I like to give people the idea for their ideas to be shared. And this to me was one of those things. So
Well,
thank you for actually doing that as well, for being a
thank
volunteer in
you.
this situation.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing with everyone.
I appreciate that. Before maybe we close up, is there anything else that you felt you wanted to say, or there was anything that is there, that's part of the conversation, or anything? Yeah.
No, not that I can think of at the moment. It's a lot of interesting directions for me to look at um, differently as far as my past and my youth and growing up and looking at them from another perspective and seeing how they played a role in my evolution, my growth, and particularly with the skip steps and the nodes, just even in general by themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I feel that this is something I felt strongly right in the beginning of the conversation, and I'll say it again, that there are multiple South Node in Gemini. There are multiple ways that skip step, I think, plays itself out. And I think one of them is Leo, right? How do you verify at a very deeply empowering way the wisdom, Sun in Virgo, and the depth of experience of life to your truth. So what I mean by that is that oftentimes with Virgo, we see it as, okay, this is where I should be more categorizing, this is where I should be more sort of organized, etc., and discerning. Yeah, that's true. But in another way, the Virgo process speaks to the emotional maturing of ourselves. And Virgo will show us where we have been very innocent and just kind of like, I just want to remain a child here. I just want everybody's belief systems to just kind of like, it would be ideal if everybody just had this like a belief system that was utopian and we could all get along. But Virgo pointed out very clearly that that's not the case. And so you've had to grapple and reconcile with how your own beliefs shape your worldview, but also how it can be difficult to coexist in an environment where people's ideas can be so radically different to yours that can oftentimes make it feel very scary to feel safe. And then other times you experience the opposite to that, right? So navigating the world where your beliefs guide you in many ways, because that's your truth, but also finding that level of binary, the on off, the yin yang of individuality, which is if I give myself permission to be individual, somehow I've also got to kind of mirror that to the other person. So how do I hold my beliefs and let them hold their beliefs and find deeper truth? That experience, that process, it seems to me part of that resolution, right? And I think there is something incredibly profound that comes out of conversations where that type of reality exists, right? What does it look like to? So there's a really good book that I think I could suggest that you could check out. It's called How to Have Difficult Conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And you've heard of it, so maybe I've mentioned it once
No,
before.
No, but sounds good.
Yeah, it's written by a person called Peter Boghossian and another author at the same time. It's an orange book. It's called How to Have Difficult Conversations. And as a fellow traveler of the Sagittarius Gemini nodes, I definitely found that book to be incredibly powerful in the way that the ideas are presented, where conversations that are not easy to have can be had, because there's a certain way that we can hold space for ourselves and each other or the other person that we're debating or having a more heated conversation about. So yeah, that's where I feel like I'll close with that process.
Thank you. I'll check that book out.
Absolutely. Right. Thanks very much. I appreciate that. So yeah, I really hope that this time with myself and Robin was beneficial in many ways. And I just wanted to highlight that a large part of this exploration for me was focusing on how bringing more or deeper acknowledgements of Robin's reality to the front and using that as a way to dialogue with her, versus maybe presenting a series of ideas from our catalog of self-study knowledge to the conversation. So for me, the idea is to prioritize valuing what your actual experience of life is like, and then making the correlation to EA and starting and then exploring further. And we could have stayed on one specific subject like the eighth house for you, but I felt that there was so much more in this chart to talk about. So in many ways, we kind of put our fingers in different pies. But there were many moments where we could have just stayed with 2 or 3 and just gone deeper into the process. But at least for me, the idea is to present that there are many opportunities to explore within a person's story. And the way that we do that is through that dialogue process. So, and listen, yeah.
Very Gemini.
Yes, it is very Gemini.